About that, the Hitchcock book that's coming up. This is spooky. The reason we're off to a late start here is that I missed a connection owing to a bird strike on the plane. This is the second major delay I've had on this book tour. This time I actually made it. I missed the previous one. The last one was because of tornadoes sweeping through New Jersey. And I've been wondering a little bit if John Ashcroft and Pat Robertson sort of had put it anyway. Sorry. All right. Okay. Well, thank you all. This is it's quite a time, and as you know, I have this book out, which is mostly my columns. I thought it would be useful before I get into the book to tell you a little bit about the strangeness of me being in this role, writing these columns, putting this book together, just to tell you where I'm coming from. I often get questions along the lines of what are you doing writing this kind of stuff? What's a nice guy like you doing in a neighborhood like this? And because I am, or was, still am, an academic economist. My specialty was international economics, and in particular, for much of the past 15 years or so, I've been what you might call an ambulance chaser. Somebody who went around looking at crises in various parts of the world. So I spent a lot of time on the Mexican crisis of '95, the Indonesian crisis of '97, spent a lot of time worrying about places like Latin America, and in general looking at places that were dysfunctional, places that had irresponsible governments, out-of-control budget deficits, that had problems of dysfunctional corporate systems with all the stuff that doesn't happen here. All right. So I was hired by the New York Times. I was hired in the summer of '99, although I didn't start writing until January of the next year. And at a time when things were good, or we thought they were good in the United States. And we expected that I'd be writing negative stories, caustic stories about bad policies abroad, and sardonic stories maybe about the follies of the new economy at home, and no doubt some critical political pieces, but I didn't think that it would be very intense, what I'd be writing about domestic politics, because the U.S. was a sensible, reasonable place and would always remain so. Of course, it didn't quite turn out that way. And during the course first of the 2000 campaign, and then increasingly since, I found myself moving on a kind of arc from puzzlement to upset to outrage, tracing what's been going on in this country. And it's, when you look at these things, I discover that it makes a big difference how you feel about it, whether it's something that's happening in someone else's country and when it's something that's happening in your own country. So it's become a pretty stiff, it's, what I guess I can say is that these columns are, as you can probably tell, are no longer written in a tone of bemused criticism. There's really a lot of, it's pretty upsetting. And I've ended up feeling that we really are at a time of great crisis for the country. I started noticing that something was seriously wrong a long time before most of the punditocracy, the commentariat, whatever your phrase is, did. And it was because I started by writing about economic policy debates, where I began to notice, first during the 2000 campaign, and then even much more so afterwards, that we were seeing something new, a level of irresponsibility, a level of dishonesty in policy that we hadn't seen before. And that's kind of hard to make a case in the abstract. So I thought I usually find it helpful to go through a specific example. Now, if we talk about the things that actually got me going, where I realized that something nasty was happening, they were things that were happening during the campaign over Social Security privatization, or during 2001 over the tax cut of that year. But those are all sort of ancient outrages now. So it helps to go and talk about something that's more recent, something that's more fresher in our memories. So let me just talk for a moment about the most recent tax cut, the 2003 tax cut that was passed through Congress a couple of weeks after the aircraft carrier landing. Nice reference point there. Okay, the first thing to say about it is it's wildly irresponsible. If you look at the federal budget and you just do just the slightest purging of the stuff that you know isn't true in the budget outlook. So you use the independent estimates by think tanks in Washington or Goldman Sachs or the independent projections of, actually this Congressional Budget Office is obliged by law to make a projection that pretends that politicians are actually going to do exactly what the law says, but this year it actually, to its great credit, issued a kind of a, well, of course, that's our projection, but if we made more reasonable assumptions, here's what it would be. And what all of these projections tell you is that the federal government is deep, deep in the red, scarily deep in the red. That we're going to run up probably $5 trillion of additional debt over the next 10 years, and then it will get worse, because then the baby boomers hit Social Security and Medicare. So the idea of pushing for another long-term tax cut in the face of that prospect is kind of mind-boggling. It's even more mind-boggling to think about pushing for a tax cut at a time of war. That's never happened before in American history, or as far as I can find out, in anybody's history, because wars, sort of kind of like cost money, and normally you almost always raise taxes in the face of a war. This time we cut them. So that in itself would have been kind of disturbing. But what really got me, I guess, looking at this, as with so many other things, is the dishonesty of the salesmanship. And that's something that it's really hard to find precedent for ever. Let me talk about three aspects of that dishonesty. As we'll see, this leads us into a general view, not just about this tax cut, but about other policies, economic and beyond. So the first thing, the budget projections. All through this, initially when the administration pushed for a tax cut this year, it started with budget projections that said that we'd be back in budget surplus by 2008. Then now it says we'll be back to a deficit of only $250 billion by 2008. But all of these projections they're just silly. Everyone knows they're silly. They're based upon a whole set of things that you know are not going to happen, like the investment tax credit of 2002 will be allowed to expire. We know that's not going to happen. In fact, the administration doesn't want it to happen. We know it's based on the assumption that the alternative minimum tax, all this technical stuff you don't want to know about, but the point is that not only that there are things that everyone knows are not going to happen, but there are things that the administration is actively pushing to stop, like expiration of the investment tax credit, failure to extend the alternative minimum tax thing, and so on. So in effect, the administration is now saying, don't worry, the deficit will be cut in half if Congress doesn't give us what we want, which is kind of a peculiar way to make a budget. And realistically, the budget is much worse. It's scarily bad, and I'll talk about just how bad it is a little later in this talk. Second thing is the cost of the tax package. Which the revenue loss. There were some moderate members of Congress who had a brief burst of responsibility. It didn't last long, but anyway, they had a sudden urge to try to do something. So they said the 10-year cost must not exceed $350 billion. And so the administration went and said, fine, we're not going to change the tax cuts at all. What we're going to do is write the law so that they sunset. Just about every provision in the bill goes away sometime between now and 2008. Those sunsets are not intended to happen. Nobody expects to actually have a decline and to have the taxes go back up to the previous levels. In fact, the administration, the day the bill was signed, started lobbying to make it all permanent. The use of sunsets, it's just one of those things you do to produce artificially low numbers, and it has been a favorite tool of this administration. The best example of that was actually the 2001 tax cut, which also was under a cap imposed by a slight fit of responsibility on the part of Congress. So they made the whole thing sunset in the year 2011. So that, well, there are a number of things about that are funny, but the best one is the estate tax. Under current law, as written, the estate tax phases out and is completely gone by 2010. And then in 2011 returns to its 2000 schedule, which means that if you have an extremely wealthy aunt and she goes in December 2010, you inherit the estate tax free. But if she makes it to January 2011, everything above $600,000 pays a 55% tax rate. I suggested at the time that the bill be called the Throw Mama from the Train Act of 2001. The point being, of course, that it's just phony. It's not intended to happen. The last piece, again, back to this year's tax cut, the last piece is who gets the benefits. Now, the line, first in the State of the Union, then repeated many times, both by Bush and by government officials, is 92 million people will receive an average tax cut of $1,000 this year. Now, that's not exactly, it's not a lie. It's literally true. But you're meant to hear it as saying that the typical family is going to get $1,000. And the trick here, of course, is that the speechwriters hope, and we're vindicated in that hope, that most people, including most people in the press, don't understand what the word average means. So let me explain. If Bill Gates walks into a bar, the average net worth of the patrons rises by a couple of $1 billion. Okay, right? You get the point. If you actually looked at the 2003 tax cut, it is true. It's about a $90 billion tax cut for 2003. Of the 130 million taxpayers in the country, 40 million get nothing. The 90 million remaining, if you divide the total tax cut by the number of taxpayers, it's about 1,000 each. But of course, that is primarily consists of very large tax cuts for a few people at the top of the distribution, and not much for anyone else. So that about half of the population this year got either no tax cut or less than $100. The typical tax cut, you might say, was $100. So again, it's deliberately deceptive rhetoric. It was intended to make something that was, like everything this administration has done, heavily tilted towards the very well-off, seem as if it were a middle class thing. Okay, now if it was just this tax cut, it was just this one bill, then this would be stuff to be angry about, to be annoyed about, but it wouldn't be a really big issue. The problem is, of course, that it's been like this on everything. The selling of both the content and the selling of the 2003 tax cut, the sort of combination of irresponsibility, of bait and switch, telling you one thing and then telling you something else later on. Oh, by the way, there's this 87 billion we forgot to mention. I didn't mention that. I'm sorry. What happens when your plane's been hit by a bird? One of the things about those budget projections I forgot to mention is that the amount of money allowed in those budget projections for post-war occupation and pacification costs, which was zero. And when asked, well, why didn't we have some number in there for that, administration officials would say, well, we don't know how much it's going to cost. So if you have, this is the way you budget for your family, right? If you have a large future expense, but you don't know how big it's going to be, you assume for family planning purposes that it will be zero, right? This is, all right. Okay, well first tax cut was the same set of principles. The 2001 tax cut was done the same way. Phony, irresponsible, phony projections, et cetera, et cetera. But the whole style applies to many other areas of policy. Environmental policy is certainly one where the combination of irresponsibility and deception is very striking, together with, much more so than on economic policy, the Orwellian use of language. So the Healthy Forests Initiative is indeed a plan to allow timber companies to cut down a bunch of trees. And the clear skies, although it's a little complicated, but the first step towards the clear skies is the biggest weakening of the Clean Air Act since its inception, and so on. So there's all of that. And not what I ever expected to be writing about foreign policy. Now, whatever you think of the case for war in Iraq, the striking thing is that, first of all, the planning was irresponsible. And this is the military professionals all said, we don't know how, we're going to keep, this is going to tie up a large number of our soldiers for an unknown period of time. We don't actually have the resources for that kind of thing. That's not what our army is designed for. And the administration said, well, plan A is we'll move in and install our favorite exiles and we'll be out in 6 months and it'll all be fine. And there was no plan B. The well, the Army Chief of Staff was fired for warning that that what might he was for. This is what happens when a bird hits your plane. He was fired for warning that what in fact did happen might happen. That there would be an extended deployment and it would really run down the soldiers. So just on sheer practicality grounds, my understanding now is that the wear and tear on the military is sort of the national defense equivalent of the deficit. It's a very severe drain based upon a highly irresponsible policy. And of course, the deceptive sales campaign. And I think we all know about that. And it was just clear that they were hyping the threat because this was something they wanted to do. And ever-shifting rationale. The original tax cut first was about returning a surplus. Then when the surplus went away, it was about creating jobs. Then it turned out it wasn't creating jobs. It was about long-run growth or something. The war was about links with 9/11. Well, there weren't any links with 9/11. It was about nuclear weapons program. Well, it wasn't about. Oh, it's about democracy. That's what it's about. So it's the whole style of things that are changing. Now, even some of my liberal friends telling me that I'm overreacting. That I'm a political naif here, that I should have known, all governments lie, all administrations allow political considerations to dictate policy, all governments give special interests more weight than they should. But this is another level. I think the point is there's a difference in degree that's so great as to be a difference in kind. So that, yes, all governments lie, but the up is downism, I've seen that phrase several times recently, of this administration is something unique. To take a plan that diverts away a large part of the resources that supports Social Security and call it a plan to save Social Security, that's something I've never seen before. That's 2 minus 1 equals 4. Clinton might have said that 2 plus 1 equals 3.2. Bush says 2 minus 1 equals 4. So it's a very different style of dishonesty. Politicization. Yes, of course, decisions are political. But it's very difficult to find anything in this administration that isn't political. It's very hard to find any examples of a policy that is actually designed to solve a problem, or actually of the administration responding to a problem by trying to solve it, as opposed to trying to use it to promote a pre-existing agenda. So whatever happens to the economy, long-term tax cuts for high-income people are the response. Whatever happens to us in international affairs, pursuing the same foreign policy objectives that Dick Cheney tried to install as the national security doctrine back in 1992 is the response. And so there's this sort of tunnel vision, whatever it is, they just proceed with what they wanted to do anyway, and there's no sense that they're actually trying to govern in any sense that I understand. Special interests, yes. I mean, we used to bemoan how much political capital the Clinton administration was spending on behalf of Chiquita Banana in trade negotiations. All right, stuff did happen. That's different from the sheer erasure of any distinctions between the lobbyists, the industries, and the government officials that's taken place right now. There was a story, I don't know how well it was covered. I was in a different place reading it in the newspapers, but there was just a major change in mining policy announced on a Friday afternoon, as things that they hope you won't notice always are, which involved disposing of waste from mining operations. The law says that for each 20-acre claim that you get to use 5 additional acres of public land to dump waste on. The rule has now been revised, which is, well, yes, each parcel is 5 acres, but in fact they will now give mining companies as much public land for waste disposal as they want, unlimited. Now, there's possibly an economic argument for this, though I think you can pretty strongly argue that it's outweighed by the environmental impacts, which are very large. But the main thing to notice is that the Secretary of the Interior is a long time, basically built her career working for the mining industry. The Deputy Secretary of the Interior built his career working for the mining industry and is still, in fact, receiving paychecks from mining interests. The Undersecretary under him is built her career working for the mining industry, and so on right down the line. There's a level of rawness about the interpenetration, personal, financial, of special interests and politicians that's pretty amazing. I guess I've descended to the level where I actually am going to quote David Letterman, who said that we really do need to finance Iraqi construction, and in making out that check, remember that there are 2 L's in Halliburton. Give you a sense of how bad I think it is. I'm going to give you a startling admission. I miss Ronald Reagan. The reason I miss Ronald Reagan, actually 2 reasons I miss Reagan. One is that although the policies in some respects looked similar, deal with the ozone layer by wearing hats and so on, tax cuts for the rich, there was a certain level of innocence about it. Reagan did cut taxes for rich people, and he did say that it was certainly a step in the direction that we've now further followed. But he didn't say, he had a theory. He said, if you cut taxes for rich people, a rising tide will raise all boats, supply-side economics. You could say that you didn't believe the theory, which I did, and others like me did. But the point was that if you believed the theory, then the rest followed. He didn't go around saying, that tax cut for rich people, that's not a tax cut for rich people, that's a tax cut for the middle class and lower income workers. Didn't just misrepresent, didn't just lie about what the policy was, which of course is what this administration does all the time. The other thing is that Reagan, to some extent at least, responded to events. So when it became clear after a year that the rosy scenarios under which the tax cut would pay for itself were untrue, he did actually accept a substantial rollback. So there was the big Reagan tax cut of 81, but the big Reagan tax increase of 82, which by no means brought rates back to where they were, but was in fact I think, relative to the economy, actually Reagan presided over the biggest tax increase in U.S. history, which was the 82 rollback. Never find that here. At this point, the deficit picture is much grimmer than it was when Reagan was there. Don't believe these attempts to say it's no worse. There are both technical reasons why it's why it's worse, and also there's the fact that the baby boomers are 20 years older. So the big burden of paying for Social Security and Medicare is much closer now than it was then. And yet there's been, actually they're pushing for additional tax cuts now. So there's been no responsiveness. Okay, so I miss Ronald Reagan. I also miss Richard Nixon. Now I don't really remember Nixon very much, but a couple of things to say. One is, of course, the behind a friendlier face, all of that style of politics is back. And John Dean, of Watergate fame, recently remarked that even Nixon didn't go after the wives. So it's all right. It really is pretty serious. But the other thing is, Nixon actually did believe in governing the country. Didn't think anyone else should have a shot at it. But if you talk to people at the agencies, like the EPA, who are old-timers, who've been around for a long time, they actually talk about the Nixon years as a golden age. Because he was serious. Having signed the Clean Air Act, he said, well, let's go about and see how we can make this thing work and enforce it. Having decided that he was going to do an economic policy, he made some mistakes, but he was serious about actually trying to run the economy as opposed to trying to ram through an agenda. So now we don't have any of that. So the question then is, what do we have? And this is, in the book, I have the main new piece is an extended introduction, trying to talk about what I think is actually going on. And I think the only way to make sense of what's happening right now is to say that we do not just have a conservative administration in power that has policies I disagree with. What we actually face is a quite radical challenge to the system. That the people in power either are themselves or defer to the views of people who really want to rip up the system we've had for the last 3 generations or so and replace it with something quite different. Now, I don't, it's, of course, the immediate, am I saying that there's some hidden conspiracy? And the answer is no, I'm saying there's an open conspiracy. It's actually right out there to look at. So on the area I know best, which is tax policy, economic policy, just go to the Heritage Foundation, which is the intellectual headquarters for all this stuff, which is actually where Dick Cheney went last week to give his speech. And read their materials, and you'll discover that they use the terms New Deal and Great Society as terms of abuse. That is, they regard everything that's happened since Franklin Roosevelt, the Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, as illegitimate. Government shouldn't be doing that. Government should be minimalist, as it was before. And so they've made it quite clear that their ultimate objective is to push us back, to get rid of the social insurance state as we know it today. If you listen to Grover Norquist, the lobbyist who's at the core of, and this is not just some guy. This is a guy who meets weekly with the leaders of the Senate and the House to vet staff appointments. All right, so that's how central he is. He also happens to be colorful in his language, which is useful because he's a little franker than most. And he said, I don't want to eliminate the government. I just want to shrink it down to the size where I can drown it in the bathtub. And you ask these people how they want to do all this, how they want to shrink down the government to something much smaller, and they say, well, we can't. If you just ask people, do you want your benefits cut, they won't do it. But what we can do is we can starve the beast. And that's the favorite phrase, starve the beast. Deprive government of the revenue it needs to provide these social insurance programs. You can't go to people and say, oh, let's eliminate Medicare, but you can create a series of budget deficits so that you say we have to curb these expenses, and you can gradually shrink the thing down, deprive it of its lifeblood, to quote Norquist again. So that's a pretty radical view. Same thing, different subject, just church-state relations. Now, if you go and look at what John Ashcroft or Representative Tom DeLay have to say, it's very clear that they really want a major injection of Christian fundamentalism into the way our government is run. Take a look at foreign policy, and it's not talking about some obscure conspiracy to point out that essentially Cheney's guys from 1992 have been wanting a doctrine of preventive war, and starting with Iraq for more than a decade, and that this was their goal, a really radical shift in the nature of the system. And it's worth saying, I guess, the latest diatribe against people like myself is to say, oh, you're just, you're so full of hate, you use such harsh language. It's worth just saying that catch these people in unguarded moments, and they'll say pretty remarkable things. If anyone caught Grover Norquist on Fresh Air with Terry Gross, she came around to the issue of the estate tax, which is, of all the pieces of this tax cut that we've had, the plan to eliminate the estate tax is the most amazing, because the estate tax falls only on a small number of very wealthy people. The bulk of it comes from really just a few thousand estates a year. And to completely eliminate it seems to be, what's that about? Why would we want to do that when we're desperately short of revenue for all kinds of other purposes? Terry Gross asked Norquist whether wasn't it true that the estate tax only falls on a small fraction of the population? And his response was, well, Hitler only killed a small fraction of the population. Think about the language. All right, I am going to, even though I'm on camera, I'm going to take off my jacket and sound of a smashing cell phone. Sorry, guys. Okay, so why don't you hear more about this? If what I'm saying, if it's so relatively obvious, if both the irresponsibility and dishonesty of the policies and the clear sense of ulterior motives is clear-cut, why don't you hear more about it? I just realized this again. Let me just backtrack a bit. This is the least coherent. Of course, the one time I'm actually on camera, I'm the least coherent. But let me just say, the question that people should ask, which is, but am I saying that Bush is this kind of radical? Am I saying that Bush wants to roll back Social Security and Medicare, that he wants a militarized foreign policy and all of that? To which the answer is, I have no idea what Bush thinks or understands or knows here. Not that, by the way, not that he's stupid. I think that's a big, big mistake that people make. It's not about stupidity. He's not intellectual, but that is not, alas, I hate to say this in a bookstore, but that is not the same thing. But the point is that Bush and his inner circle have decided that basically have decided that Daddy lost the last election because he didn't have the firm support of the hard right. And their political strategy is to make moderate noises, but in all essential things, to give the hard right what it wants. And so the radicals are dictating policy. And it doesn't really matter whether Bush himself actually shares the goals or even thinks about what the country will look like in 10 years. The radicals are dictating policy. Okay, so why don't you hear more about this? Why is this more, I wasn't entirely alone. But it's true, I was the only person with that prominent a piece of journalistic real estate on loan to talk about this stuff. A couple of things. One is it's just too steep a hill to climb. It's hard to believe. Just hard to face up to the thought that something that drastic may be happening in this country is just very hard. I had an experience about a year ago. I wrote a piece about Tom DeLay. And I quoted some of his stuff. He has said that he's in office to promote a biblical worldview. And that he pursued Bill Clinton, not because of policy differences, but because he felt that Bill Clinton didn't share that biblical worldview. And what does he mean by a biblical worldview? It turns out, well, after the Columbine school shootings, he called a press conference, Representative Tom DeLay called a press conference to explain that the reason that things like this happen is because we teach evolution in the high schools. Now, I got a bunch of mail and phone calls from liberal friends after that saying that I had a problem, that I was going off my rocker. What does it matter? They said, what some crazy guy in Congress says. This is Representative Tom DeLay. Indeed, he is a crazy guy. He's also the House Majority Leader. And given the way things actually work right now, the Speaker of the House is a figurehead. So Tom DeLay runs Congress. This is the second most powerful man in America. And the point is but people don't want to believe that things have reached that extreme a point. Other things to say. Role of the media. Yes, and of course I am the media, but I'm a very eccentric and accidental part of the media. I don't know quite what the Times thinks of what I'm doing. I mean, I think they're very careful not to dictate too much. But I do sell papers. But I wonder if they didn't know what they were getting. I didn't know what I was getting into. The point is, anyway, about the media. A good part of the media is part of the machine, part of the vast right-wing conspiracy, if you like. It's certainly the Washington Times or the Murdoch Empire, Fox News. And we do really live in Orwellian times, right? If you were writing a novel, you would never have dared to say that the slogan of the propaganda arm would be fair and balanced. I'm almost losing hope, by the way. I do insult Fox News at every opportunity in the desperate hope that they will sue me. But I seem to have lost out. Anyway. Okay, so that's one large piece. Then there's the mainstream media, although Fox, by viewership, is more mainstream than CNN now. But anyway, the rest of the media. What the media suffer from, first of all, is a very severe, almost pathological case of even-handedness. That is, they ought to be objective. That's what we ought to be doing. But objective is hard. And objective can also make you a lot of enemies. So you usually settle for being even-handed, which is not the same thing. So that whatever anybody says, you carefully quote some Republicans and some Democrats, giving them exactly the same number of column lines, and then you've written a balanced piece. I summarized this at one point in a column which led people to, several people thought I was talking about them. I said that if Bush said that the Earth was flat, the headlines in major mainstream publications would be, "Shape of the Earth, views differ." And that's about the way it is. You can read several stories like that in major newspapers, including major newspapers based in New York, in the last week or so. Okay. One more thing, there is intimidation. Now, at this point, the intimidation isn't of the form we're going to come and beat you up, or where the Homeland Security Administration is going to send you to a cage in Gitmo. It's not there, or maybe I should say not there yet. But anyway, what it is nonetheless it's pretty severe. A news organization that crosses the ruling coalition is going to be, of course, subjected to howls about liberal bias. It's going to receive mass mailing campaigns organized, whether by various think tanks or groups or by Rush Limbaugh. It's going to generally find itself under harassment. An individual journalist who crosses them is going to find himself under the same thing. Plus, I mean, at first you do get amazing hate mail, and I should have a pair of tongs to pick the stuff up. But you also get efforts to drum up scandals. All the stuff that managed to turn a small money-losing investment into a $70 million 7-year investigation is now turned not at the people in power, but at those who criticize the people in power. It's amazing, and it's pretty. It can be pretty upsetting. If you want to take these people on, you better have a very boring private life. And to give you a sense of the kind of level of intimidation that is now, we've become accustomed to it already. But there was this nice, those of you who saw my column on Friday, I mentioned it, but a few weeks ago, Christiane Amanpour, the CNN correspondent, gave an interview in which she expressed some regret about her network's failure to present a more balanced view before the war. And she said something like, to a certain degree, perhaps I and even my station were intimidated by the administration and its foot soldiers at Fox News. It was a fairly forthright statement, good for her. Fox News issued a statement saying, it's better to be viewed as a foot soldier for Bush than as a spokeswoman for Al-Qaeda. That's the kind of level of things. And people, now, how many journalists are thinking to themselves, I better not cross these guys? I don't think it quite works that directly. I think it's that every time you do cross them, you get an electric shock, and you get kind of conditioned not to cross them. Okay, how bad is it? Well, I think it's pretty severe, and the thing that I can measure most, I'm not sure, it's a funny thing, the things that I know best, given what I know, are not necessarily the things that bother me most as a citizen. So if you ask what really scares me, it would be civil liberties issues and ultimately environmental issues. But in terms of the economics are bad enough, as is. We've got, thanks to these policies sold on false pretenses, we've got budget, trade, debt numbers that are quickly looking like those of a banana republic. This is going back to the beginning, what I know. I know banana republics, okay? I know crises, and I do know that if I saw a third world country with the budget deficit as big as ours and with the obvious unwillingness to make any realistic adjustments, obvious unwillingness to collect taxes, or since the programs that taxes are supposed to be financing are popular, to cut those programs by the amounts that would be necessary, I would be warning. I would be saying this country is seriously in the danger zone. It's kind of interesting. I just learned that, people say, oh, well, you're just Chicken Little. Turns out that Lehman Brothers has developed a crisis warning system that's based on a bunch of economic indicators. It's called Damocles. And they claim that, of course, retrospectively, it would have told you about the Asian financial crisis and the Argentine crisis. It would have caught the big crises. And the good news from Damocles is that all of the developing countries that have had big crises in the past now appear to be well out of the danger zone. They're all getting rather low readings on Damocles. The bad news is that the U.S., if you apply Damocles to the U.S., it says, that alarm bells start ringing. Now, so that will happen. It won't happen for a while because the world financial market can't believe, like the pundits and the populace can't believe this is happening to America. But at a certain point, there will be a realization that we really have lost our way, and maybe lost our heads in the new century. Doesn't have to be like this, I guess. And just to wind this down, the country is rich, has enormous resources. Taxes are, by our own standards or by those of other advanced countries, rather low. Particularly at the upper end of the income distribution. By the time the Bush tax cuts have fully filtered through, tax cuts on the truly wealthy will be, tax rates on the truly wealthy will be down to levels not seen since the 1920s. We also have income inequality that is right back at 1920s levels, by the way. And so we have the point is that it's not hard to imagine raising the money we have these huge budget deficits, but if we went halfway to a Canadian level of taxation, we'd have a budget surplus. So we have the resources to deal with these things. I think we also actually have the public's fundamental values are not nearly as radical as those that are being imposed on the nation. That when you ask people which is more important, tax cuts or preserving Social Security, you get overwhelming response of Social Security. When you ask people political, religious questions, the country still appears to be quite tolerant, quite open-minded. The problem is that people don't know that this radical agenda is being imposed. They don't understand what's happening. It's very hard for them to understand what's happening because it comes so thoroughly wrapped in the flag. And what that says is the most important thing is to try to get the word out, which is something, of course, that I'm trying to do, that an increasing number of people are trying to do. And I'm hoping that I and the other good liberal books of this fall. My publisher hates this, but I have to say there's a whole raft of really good ones. Molly Ivins, Joe Conason, David Korn just out, and much as it hurts me to say it, Al Franken are really, really, what we hope, what my host said, we hope we can get the word out, and at least, I think if we can actually have the discussion, if we can actually get what's happening out into the open, then the good guys win the argument. So that's what we're trying to do, and thank you. Okay. Lacking instructions from my host, I'm just going to call on people, and I'll repeat questions or abbreviated versions, because there's a camera there. Yes.
Could you comment on the Treasury report that was excerpted from the 2004 budget, in which they projected a $44 trillion unfunded liability for Social Security and Medicare? I'd like to know about the accuracy and why it was taken out and why the media didn't cover it.
Oh boy, okay. Question was that there was a Treasury report saying that the unfunded liabilities of Social Security and Medicare are much bigger even than we've been saying. And why was it taken out? Why wasn't it covered more by the media? There's actually, it's not as simple a story as you might imagine. You might think that this was something that would have helped to discredit the administration. But the actual reason why the stuff was in there was an attempt to discredit Social Security and Medicare. It was actually going the other way. And the reason that was done the difference was the standard estimates now of the budget shortfall for Social Security and Medicare run out to the year 2075. And this study said, well, suppose we go on forever. Now there are a couple of points there. One is the reason I'm falling silent is that there's a real danger of me turning back into a college professor and starting to have too much stuff here. I think that's actually not helpful. Now the uncertainties of the out years beyond 2075 are so large that you want to discount it somewhat. Now, given what I was saying about occupation costs, of course, if you have a large unknown expense sometime in the future, you don't want to assume it's zero. But it's probably a good idea not to think too hard now about how you're going to deal with expenses that are still 75 years away. The other thing about it is that a lot of that is driven by medical costs. And it's not entirely clear why current generations should be taxing themselves to pay higher medical costs for 2 or 3 generations down the line, which will be driven largely by the availability of medical procedures that we haven't yet invented. So I think that was actually kind of a bum steer. That was the wrong. Now the interesting point, of course, is that if you use the standard 75-year calculation, what they will always tell you is what the standard line now is, well, our big problem are these huge looming Social Security and Medicare deficits, which is intended to make you think that we cannot sustain those systems. But the interesting point right now is that on the 75-year basis, the shortfall from Medicare and Social Security is actually smaller than the shortfall resulting from the Bush tax cuts. So the truth is, if we have a looming fiscal problem, it is as much or more due to the tax cuts of the last 3 years than to Social Security and Medicare. And part of what was going on with this study was to move the goalposts so that would no longer be true. Yeah?
Arnold.
Oh, God. All right, Arnold was the question. Yeah, I actually had a day of despair after that. And not because I know that he's going to be a bad governor. I mean, I don't know what he's going to do as governor, but that is the point. All right? He ran with no coherent campaign, nothing at all. Just, I'm going to rescind the increase in vehicle license fees, and I'm not going to touch education, and I'm going to balance the budget. And I guess he's going to, the people at Digital Light and Industrial Light and Magic, I guess, are going to fabricate some money to do that, right? It made no sense at all. So it was disturbing that people would vote on that basis. It was disturbing. California's problems they're the driest, most straightforward stuff. It's just green eyeshade stuff. There's, okay, dot-coms went bust, California's income tax revenues are down, so you have to have some combination of spending cuts and tax increases. There's nothing magical about it, and there's nothing mysterious about it, and there's nothing magical about the solution. And it is very depressing that people would vote for someone believing that he can solve these problems without explaining the choices because he's a tough guy. It's even more depressing when he isn't, in fact, a tough guy. He just plays one in movies. And the most disturbing thing was the media. The media coverage was just, you kept on waiting for them to decide, okay, but this isn't Entertainment Tonight. This is about state finances. And they never did. And sheer falsehoods got repeated over and over again. You kept on hearing about the $38 billion California budget deficit. The real number is 8. You kept on hearing about the terrible state of the California economy, which has actually done slightly better than the national average these past 2 years. So that just was a reminder of how hard it's going to be to get any sense into the next election. Yeah.
You speak at the end that perhaps if we get the word out, there may be a change. But what we've experienced in this state is the idea of the tax freeze. Much of local government here is done by property tax freeze, and yet even in California, gubernatorial race, tax freeze, no taxes. It seems that really since the Reagan administration, we've raised a generation now to think of taxes as an evil compendium of hard work.
Okay, the question for those who couldn't hear is, how do we get past this notion that taxes are bad and we must freeze or lower taxes? And it's going to be hard. I mean, I have to admit, my optimism, which wells up every once in a while, has to deal with a couple of really bad things that have happened. Alabama was a terrifying example. That actually was a tax cut for lower income people, coupled with a tax increase for higher income people, and the right ran a campaign of hiring people with rural black accents to say your taxes are going to go up, and it worked. And the referendum was defeated overwhelmingly. Yeah, we're going to. let me say, I think politically it's not going to be just enough for somebody with sensible ideas to win the 2004 presidential election by 10 electoral votes. Because just imagine, I mean, worse things could happen, clearly. We could continue unabated down the path we're going, but just try to imagine what it's going to take to get this country back on track. All of it technically easy, all of it politically very hard, and then try to imagine the next presidential term with, well, take your pick, but Howard Dean in the White House and Tom DeLay still running Congress. And it's going to be, the French, I think, talk about cohabitation, and talk about that cohabitation, wow. So it's going to be very difficult. We've got to get people to understand the link between taxes and the things that taxes pay for. And right now we've massively, the dissonance. People just imagine that public services grow on trees. Should try, okay. Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah, go ahead.
I assume that you are familiar with the book, The Radical Center, which has, sort of presents the theory that about every 70 years there is a major remake in this country politically and financially and sometimes socially, and that we're headed towards this train wreck once again, just as we were at the time of the Depression and before that, at the time of the Civil War, and that there's hope that down the line in the next 5 or 10 years that train wreck will wake everyone up and that we will find a new political and economic way to work our way out of it.
Yeah. Our question is that there's the theory that roughly every 70 years, which is about right in this case, that we have a train wreck, and that once you get out at the other end, 20 years later, you come up with a better social system. So I guess Civil War, Franklin Roosevelt, and now this. I think New Zealand might be a nice place to be while we get through those 20 years. And the trouble is, of course, it's funny actually. One thing that always occurs to me is we could use a Franklin Roosevelt right now, and if you can find one, let me know. The trouble is, of course, I think we're headed for a period of turmoil. I think we're headed for, obviously next year is going to be the meanest, bitterest, ugliest presidential campaign since the 1920s, and probably what follows will be worse. And it's pure faith that what comes out at the end is something better. I mean, you want to believe in the genius of America and manifest destiny, and I hope that's right. But I do worry that, of course, what could come out at the end would be a sort of confirmation that we kind of really blew it. So yes, but the point is, it doesn't matter, right? The point is to try to make it come out the right way. Way at the back. Sorry, I'll get you later.
What for the stock market as a result of the Bush tax cuts and the current economic climate? Rebound now from that point to turn around and crash.
Okay, rebound in the stock market. Is it solid? Will it turn around? Will it crash? What does it say? Don't know. The thing about stock prices is that they bear a very loose relationship to any fundamentals. The old line used to be that the stock market had predicted 9 of the last 5 recessions, and I don't know what I don't know quite what to make of this one. The only thing to say is that there does appear to be quite a lot of. I don't think we've gotten the bubbles out of our system. I think there's quite a lot of naive buying going on right now. And for what it's worth, insider selling is proceeding briskly, even as the market rises. So this is, I find it, I still think stocks look very pricey. And the economy itself, just to say that about, we clearly had brisk growth in the third quarter, but not in jobs. And which way is it going to go from here? And the answer is nobody knows. And if anyone says he knows, that only proves his ignorance. The numbers are weird right now. They're different indicators pointing in different directions. So I have no idea where we're going from here. I did try to call you earlier. Yeah, sorry.
This past week on the website Instapundit, there was an editorial, the gist of which was debunking your economic theory because you look at people's motivations
I didn't read it, but I can imagine.
Have a chance to comment on what you think about that. And the second question is, do you care to comment on any of the Democratic presidential candidates?
Okay.
If not in general, what do you think about the economic theories?
Okay, let me just try and remind myself not to forget the second half of the question. I didn't read this thing on Instapundit. I heard about it. I mean, you know, those who can do, those who can't discuss methodology. And you know, I'm making the economic arguments pretty clearly. And then I'm also saying, since the economic arguments of the other side seem so obviously wrong, and since there's so much obvious dishonesty going on, then as a citizen, I start trying to understand their motives. End of story. That's it. And the point, I think, is if certainly I've been right so far in being pessimistic about the budget and also in concluding quite early on that we were not going to get a reasonable response when the budget went into deficit. So what more to say? But it is funny. For those who haven't read it, it's just saying, oh, rather than actually try to respond to what I'm saying, it's, well, but Krugman talks about the motives of people, and he shouldn't do that. Economists should be pure and only discuss the theory. One more thing I think I should say, that, look, a lot of the economists advocating the policies of this administration are economists. Well, there's no licensing requirement. But if you ask, now that can sound, and it probably is, pretentious and snippy. But the point being that there are conservative economists who you know, have like really done work and earned their reputation. But a lot of the people you see on TV, a lot of the people you read about even in the New York Times Magazine, have careers that entirely consist of working for right-wing think tanks or right-wing politicians. That's just not the real thing. For what it's worth, sorry, I'm riffing here. I think I'm still freaked out by that bird. For what it's worth, you know, Robert Barrow on Harvard, who writes for Business Week, is supportive of the administration's policies. What's interesting is that what he says to explain why he supports it is exactly what I'm saying is the ulterior motive. He says, well, we need to starve the beast. Budget deficits are good to starve the beast. So he's a smart economist. He does, in fact, know his stuff, and that's why, you know, he's basically saying there's a con going on here, and I approve of it. Fair enough. I mean, but that's what I'm saying, that you have to ask what the motive is. When Stephen Moore says, no, we're going to have these wonderful supply side effects and it'll all pay for itself, well, two things. First, that's just not plausible, and then secondly, who is Stephen Moore? Sorry. How did he get there? And the answer is entirely as a political servant. Democrats. First, I actually haven't done the homework to go through. As soon as I get to spend a few days, a few nights sleeping in my own bed and a few days at home, I'm actually planning to do a workup to just go through what I think. So I can't actually say. I mean, all of them are. What was Bismarck's remark about a Bavarian being halfway between an Austrian and a man? I think all of the Democratic platforms are sort of halfway between the Bush administration and actually making sense, which you know, it's a big improvement. So, but I can't say that. The other question, I guess, is going to just do I endorse one? I can't, of course. The Times rules, I can't do that. In fact, Times rules I don't endorse, you know, at all. So in principle, you don't know which party I'm supporting in the 2004 election, and you don't know which party William Safire is endorsing either. But I can't. You know, you can tell my instinctive preference, just being the kind of person I am, and also just seeing what I think is going on, is that it's got to be somebody who's combative, somebody who's not going to try to be polite, somebody who's going to come out really swinging, and that can't be somebody whose campaign plan is to be like Bush, only less so, and that, of course, kind of narrows the field. Let me try. Okay, there.
Could you talk a little bit more about investment houses and New York banks, people who should be more rational and should be thinking long term and maybe aren't?
Okay. Yes. Question is, investment houses, New York banks, people who should be thinking long-term are rational and often aren't. Very important point to make there. Actually, it's one of the first essays in one of the old stories in the book, articles in my book, is a piece I wrote for Fortune back in, I think, '97, called 7 Habits of Highly Defective Investors, which was, I actually kind of, I think, eliminated a lot of future consulting business by writing. I didn't say which meeting I was at, but they knew, and it was a meeting of investment professionals that I came away with some kind of caustic thoughts about it. I think the biggest thing to say is, look, these people are they're careerists. And if you're working managing money for a mutual fund or for an investment bank, while there's an asymmetry in the risks. If you take a position that is very different from what everyone else is saying, and you're right, well, that's very nice. But if you take a position that is very different from what everyone else is saying and you're wrong, that's the end of your career. Whereas if you take a position which is the same as what everyone else is saying and you're all wrong together, you don't suffer at all. So there's a real incentive to there's actually a paper by I'm losing. I think it's Jeremy Stein, but I'm not sure. But there was actually a paper, Herd on the Street, HERD, that actually tried to model all of this stuff. The point is that there really is, when you have agents managing your money, they do tend to run in a herd. So it's very hard. Now there still is the question. I mean, the big question right now is, if you look at the budget picture, look at the real severity of it, why are people still willing to lend the federal government money for 10 years at 10%? For 10 years at 4%. Even if you think it's only a 1 chance in 5 or 1 chance in 10 that we're going to have a very serious crack up, that should be giving you a much larger risk premium. To which the only answer is, but it always seems to be that way, that right up until the moment of crisis, there's always people want to believe, and particularly advanced countries tend to get a benefit of the doubt. You think to yourself, well, it can't happen to a country like that. So I think I do think the United States at some point, which we probably have some years to run when people will just assume that somehow it's all going to work out. But we are at a certain point going to have a Wile E. Coyote moment. For scholars who know Roadrunner, Wile E. Coyote would always run off the edge of a cliff a little ways and then notice there was nothing under him, and then, so that's, I think, what's going to happen to the bond market in the U.S. Yeah?
I wanted you to talk a little bit about the environment and the privatization of natural resources, particularly water.
Okay. Questions about the environment and the privatization of natural resources, particularly water. Wow. I haven't done I have a bunch of things people have sent me about water privatization, and I haven't done the homework, so I can't speak out on that. Yeah. Well, the air, look, what we're seeing now is a remarkable rollback of environmental regulations. The one that really, we've had a couple of stories, front page, then it fades out again. The story about New Source Review is really, in some ways, just encapsulates what's going on here. Right? We have the Clean Air Act. Clean Air Act, through a mistake, basically, of the original policy, grandfathers existing facilities. So you have rules that apply to new facilities, new power plants, but not to old ones. And it became clear over time that the trouble was that you would, bit by bit replace all of the parts of an existing facility, but call it, so it would in effect become a new one, but it would still be the same old facility under the law. And so when people put the Clean Air Act into effect, they expected much more much more rapid. They expected that all old power plants would be gone by now, and of course they aren't. So we've had this thing enforced with increasing aggressiveness during the Clinton administration of New Source Review, which was that the EPA would take a look at an investment in an existing industrial or power plant and say, well, look, this in effect is a new source of pollution and therefore has to obey the rules. That's not grandfathered anymore. And that's just been eliminated by the administration. The thing about it is it severely guts the act, and it happens to be worth something between $5 and $10 billion to a small group of companies who, guess what, gave a lot of money to the campaign and also have employed at various points quite a few people who are now in the administration. So we're talking about this, the ability of the government to hand over very large favors to people, in this case by relaxing environmental rules, and in effect to profit both politically and personally from it, and the absence of any effective watchdogging. God, sorry, in English any noun can be verbed, but anyway, and the absence of effective watchdogging in our current environment, it makes it all possible. And there's much more of that, and the water privatization, I really know I'm supposed to. My colleague Tom Friedman says it's a target-rich environment, and there's just more stuff than you can go after. Okay, I'm going to take about 2 more, I think, and then I got to sign some books.
I want to ask you a question about foreign policy. What is your understanding of what's going on between Bush and Sharon with the wall going up,
Yeah.
with invading other countries and all of that?
Okay, the question about foreign policy, Bush, Sharon, the wall. Because I know nothing that everyone doesn't know. I don't have any inside sources, anything like that. So I just read the news. I probably read more newspapers than most normal, sane people would, but I don't. But just I think Sharon has taken Bush's measure. He's decided that nothing he does will cause Bush to turn on him. And that for a variety of reasons, the domestic political situation in the U.S. is such that Sharon is no longer concerned that he might face even a slap on the wrist in terms of his policies. So that's the story. It's interesting. The people in the U.S. are terrified to cross these guys. Karl Rove will call you up and scream and obscenities at you, and there's a tremendous amount of people are afraid. Quite a few people outside the United States have reached the conclusion that more or less that these guys can be rolled. It's kind of a very strange thing. So we've got Sharon, not just Sharon, who knows that he will never be crossed, but we've got Kim Jong-il saying, well, I can go and reprocess those rods and the Americans won't do anything. And the Iranians going ahead and saying, well, while the Americans are bogged down in Iraq, they're not going to come after us. And so let's speed ahead with our nuclear weapons program. So it's a pretty amazing thing. All right, I'm going to try to raise, way back there. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Sorry, this was orchards being knocked down where? In West Bank? Sorry? In Iraq. All right. Oh, I hadn't heard about that one. Okay, well, I've been dodging birds, so sorry. All right, let me just try. Yeah. I have to say, it sounds kind of a Sharon-esque policy, doesn't it? Yes.
I just want you to comment on terrorism. That seems like such a wild card. They've hit us with fear. That's why everybody's so afraid of the terrorist thing. It seems like the one wild card that distracts everyone's attention from what's really going on. And it's kind of a sliding in thing.
Yeah.
How is that going to? Do you have any comments?
Yeah. Okay. Basically, what do I think about terrorism and our political system? No, I mean it was. Look, I mean, clearly 9/11 really just did a number on our minds, and I keep on doing this. Let me recommend another book, Chris Hedges, "War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning." Fantastic book, and he talks about particularly the way that people deify their leaders in the time of war or terror. almost no matter how bad the leaders are. So he talks about how the Argentines rallied around their junta during the Malvinas, the Falkland Islands War, and that's certainly one of the things that's happened. And the thing that has been very hard to get across is how little of how much the administration's foreign policy agenda has had nothing whatsoever to do with terrorism, and also the most hate mail I ever received, the biggest piles, were the first few months after 9/11, when I started saying, look, they are exploiting this politically. They're exploiting it for unrelated goals. And people just did not want to believe that. It was very, very hard. We now know that, I mean, I was looking at economic stuff. We now know that the Iraq War was something that they were pushing for literally while the towers were still burning. And without ever finding any evidence of a link. So it distorts everything. Now, I thought it would fade away. I thought it would be reduced to something like the war on drugs. It would be that the terrorist issue would be something that we'd always be worrying about, but not central to our politics. And I was wrong, because they turned it into a justification for another war, and so it have managed to keep it rolling. And more people than you would believe think that that's what it was all about. That the war in Iraq was about was in fact a big wag the dog exercise. What happens next? I don't know. At the rate things are going, we may have to go and invade Afghanistan all over again. So it's maybe a while. I'm going to take one more. Yes, okay, that's a really different one. Manufacturing. All right. This is the place where I'm not a predictable, reliable liberal. In fact, the American Prospect had an attack piece on me in the mid-90s because of my free trade arguments. So let me give you the free trade argument and then tell you what the problem is right now. I'm basically a free trader, pro-globalization, because of the developing countries. When I went to grad school in the mid-1970s, I considered specializing in development economics. I didn't do it because it was too depressing a field. Around 1975, development economics was non-development economics. There were no success stories. No country had ascended from the third world since Japan in the 1880s. And it was just, there was not much hope. There's been a lot of hope since. We've had a couple of full ascent from third world to first, South Korea, and a lot of positive things happening in places like China and Thailand and so on. Not 100% positive by any means, but there's some good stories, and they all involve exports of manufactured goods to advanced countries. So that hope requires that there be a sufficiently open world market. Also countries that just kept their heads above water with that sort of thing. So we're talking about places like Bangladesh, which has avoided a Malthusian crisis because of labor-intensive exports. All right, now what do I say about the loss of jobs in advanced countries in return? Under normal circumstances, I say, look, that's not actually total number of jobs is not a problem. Our ability to create jobs depends upon the Federal Reserve can always cut interest rates and get the economy moving, and stuff tends to come back, and there is an issue of income distribution. There is an issue of downward pressure on wages of blue-collar workers, and that's something to be concerned about, but it's manageable if we have other policies to help the income distribution, which of course we don't, but we can agitate for them. It's very difficult right now because with the Fed having lowered interest rates almost as much as it can, and still no job creation. You take a look, and a job lost to imports from China or from India is a job lost. End of story. What we need, first off, is a real economic recovery in this country. Policies that would actually address the problem. And then we can discuss this thing more rationally. And I think the answer has to be, it would just be a huge tragedy if we closed off those opportunities. When we say, my God, some skilled jobs are moving to India now with the service stuff. At one level, from a global point of view, that's a wonderful thing. This is the best. We now have the first real hope of substantial economic development in India, which is a billion people. What we have to do is find a way to sustain incomes and in the United States while that happens, which I think can be done through tax and social policy. Last point, just to say, I know, easy for me to say. I mean, and I'm always on weak moral ground here because they aren't outsourcing either college professors or op-ed columnists yet. But that's still where I come down. I think I probably, if I'm going to sign books, I probably have to bring this to a halt. So thank you. Thank you.